Virtually every church would claim they preach the Bible
and are committed to Jesus.
and care about discipleship.
Yet, despite the same objectives, you probably know what it's like to be in a healthy church and a not so healthy church.
So what separates the two?
That's what we're here to discuss today, the 10 habits of healthy churches.
Let's dive in. Well, hey there, and welcome to the Pro Church Tool Show. We're here to help you and your church navigate the biggest communication shift in 500 years. I'm Brady Shearer, your host. I'm joined as always by my co-host. We call him Father Floral. It's Alexander Mills.
Hello.
Let's kick this off by saying we are not going to cover the things that you are going to comment about. So when you comment,
Put your fingers away right now.
we're not talking about the regular listeners. You know the vibe. But when people stumble upon this video and comment, well, maybe we should preach the gospel.
Yes.
Yeah, I understand that there are some synonymous items. But as we said in the intro, virtually every one of these churches, every church we've been a part of that will consider itself a Bible-believing church is going to hit the same marks. And yet, despite that, we see variance, health, unhealth. What are the healthy habits that I have seen as I have visited so many different churches and spent time with their leadership around the world, started to identify different things that seem to be commonalities. We've got 10 of them. Pastor, resident pastor, thoughts before we dive into number one?
I mean, we talk a lot about mission and vision at the churches that we work at, the churches we serve at. And of course, it's to see more people take more next steps in their journey with Jesus. If you were to distill it all down, that's what we're all trying to do. But in our efforts to accomplish that goal, that mission, that vision, we ought to also be aspiring to be healthy people that make up a healthy church. So we've got 10 characteristics of, healthy habits of healthy churches. And the first one addresses the commenters right away. The first one, holy character.
Yeah, and I had to put this in for those people, right? You can't get mad at me. This is important because, as Alex just said, if we're all trying to aspire to the same objectives as people that serve and work in church, the thing that separates a healthy church from an unhealthy church, it often comes down to interpersonal relationships. Is the leadership trustworthy? Are they reliable?
Yeah.
Can you trust that they have, at their heart of hearts, holy character? Because what we know is true is that all types of power can corrupt. The Bible talks about the human heart being deceitful above all things. And the more power we are given, the more that people rely on us and count on us, and thus we are elevated and platformed, literally and metaphorically, the greater the likelihood becomes that we can subtly, maybe not so subtly, abuse that power.
Yeah.
And abuse that power sounds like something like dramatic, but it can just be little things.
Totally.
And what I have found in leadership, and I have failed these tests, I have passed these tests, but what I've found, the temptation exists when you have power to use it for your own good. Sometimes that good you can explain away as, this is for the collective good. Sometimes you're like, this might not be for the collective good. This might just be for me. And at the end of the day, we want to believe about our leadership that they have holy character. That doesn't mean that they won't make mistakes. It doesn't mean that they won't be tempted, but they'd be the type of people to acknowledge those mistakes, to make amends, and to be different the next time it comes along. And for the most part, let's say, avoid and resist the temptation.
And we've got 10 habits of healthy churches that we're going to get to in today's show. So we're not going to spend too much time talking about how to have holy character in church. But what I can tell you is the church I pastor is a small little rural congregation. And we, for whatever reason, we have folks kind of come and find refuge at our church, coming from different church contexts.
What he's saying is they come from my church. Around the corner,
That's not what I'm
they
saying.
leave my church because they're like, I'm tired of this. I can't find refuge here. No, I understand.
That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is I can tell you that a lot of the folks who do come to our church wounded, looking for refuge or shelter, this is the thing that they are recoiling from, which is, I belong to this church, and in various ways, there was this lack of holy character, and it was unhealthy, and I'm just looking, I want to believe in the church, I want to belong to the church, and so I'm here, but this is the thing that stands out amongst the others of, hey, this church was unhealthy. Oh, why? What was your experience? It was just this lack of holy character. So this, the rest of the list maybe isn't organized in order of importance, but surely this first one, this is the bedrock of it all.
Love it. Let's move to number two.
Number two, hard work. Just good old-fashioned hard work.
The work that we do really matters. And it's not always glamorous. And Sunday is coming every single week. Commitment to hard work and showing up and being faithful is one of the habits that I see in the healthiest leaders. and the healthiest churches. And I think that the rhythm for this is not intensity, it's frequency.
Yes.
It's being the church and being the leader that just shows up. We talk about social, no weeks off. That type of imperative being brought to the work of shepherding and the work of pastoral care and the work of organizing church programming and the importance of that. It doesn't need to mean that you're like over exerting in hours per day, but you know, I don't know, maybe this is unfair, but I remember like interning at church when I was in high school and thinking like, what does a pastor do all day? Really?
It's a lot of just sitting in your office and reading the Bible.
Studying the scriptures. So hard work being imperative. And then I'll just jump to number 3 right now, because this to me is a triad. And I switched out the order, and I forgive me, I don't know where I saw this, but I saw this presented on the internet as a triad. And maybe it was one creator that just came up with it. Maybe it's something that is actually very familiar to everyone. It's like, yeah, we've all heard this 100 times. But the triad was hard work, tender hearts, holy character. And I thought of that as like, man, as my kids get older, we kind of started with like elementary values. Like the one I've always said to my daughter is like, just keep trying and be a good friend. And she's 10 years old now. And so she's getting older. She was asking some questions about how she entered into the world.
Okay.
This week. So she's growing up. And so like, I think she's getting close to having the maturity to handle like larger axioms that are deeper in their wisdom. And I really liked this triad, because I was like, you know what, babe, if all I had to teach you was 3 things, it would be hard work, tender hearts, holy character. The hard work and the tender hearts, and the tender hearts is this 3rd one.
Yeah.
Those are purposefully kind of paradoxical in a sense. Like you think of hard work, and you know, Alex is having a deck installed on his house right now. And he was talking about the gentlemen that are working there. You know, you think about the men that are working in the backyard and they got the calloused hands. Why? Because they're doing so much hard work that the literal skin on their hands has become hard. And like, it cannot be penetrated by something as simple as like gravel, nor should it, because there is a lot of like, you know, intense material being handled by these masculine men. Tender hearts. Oh, well, that's like Martha and Mary, you know, the people that are and the idea is that if you can have both, that's when you are the better embodiment of what Jesus is. And then holy character is that anchor, because the output would be hard work. The output would be tender hearts. What's the anchor that's driving all that? What's the true motivator? It's the holy character.
You know, there's a biblical principle that informs all of these for sure. And there's a through line of these 3, which is the leadership of Jesus himself, right? And so we see all these things revealed to us in the leadership of the teacher of all teachers, the rabbi of all rabbis, who gave his life in a sense and modeled what it looks like to cultivate, frankly, like church community, a faith community, while staying soft. And it is the weekly, often daily grind of church. It is a marathon. It is not a sprint. And that's why the work is hard. And for as long as you devote yourself to doing this work, it will be hard. And there is, I'm not sure I have the best language to put to it, but when you're doing hard work like that, there is a tendency to yourself become hardened. But it's the holy character that is rooted in the image, the revelation of God revealed in Jesus, that allows us to do hard things while continually being soft. And that's the type of people that we want to be in our faith communities, so that our faith communities are healthy and whole and holy even.
Yeah, so that holy character is like, it's like a protective compound in a way that is, you're trying to do 2 things that are kind of meant to be at odds with each other. How do you do it? Well, that's what the way of Jesus is all about. Okay, let's move out of the triad. Number 4, the language you use becomes the culture you build. What I love about a framework for an episode like this, 10 Habits, is it allows us to basically evaluate ourselves and our ministries alongside each. One of the things I picked up when I was younger, as I was getting into the world of church leadership, was how I was drawn to leaders that always chose their words carefully. It didn't mean that they were kind of like the prototypical, like slow to speak type of person. Sometimes we're people that love to gab. But you could tell that their words were methodical, they were meaningful, and great measure was given to the words that they chose. And I don't know if I understood why that was at the beginning. And maybe I don't understand now, because this is episode number 848 of this podcast. That is just, hey, you want 900 hours of gab? Well, you've come to the right place. What's the topic? Church media? 900 hours! The language you use becomes the culture you build. The wisdom here is understanding that culture is a byproduct of the tone and the words that you choose. Sometimes I'll publish a piece of content and I'll say, hey, here's something that a lot of churches say. Try saying this instead. And people will say, like, it's really not that deep, bro. And I understand on the surface, like, I perfectly get why they would respond that way. But my challenge to them is to understand that all of these little choices, they add up over time to form culture. If you always speak in this type of tone, if you always use language that's laced with certain connotations that you probably wouldn't want associated with your church and would never claim, yet the language you use is associated with those things, that's not harmless. That is not without effect. Over time, it builds culture.
Well, and again, I'll do my pastoral thing here, because I guess I just can't escape it even if I tried. But
you've talked even more than 900 hours, Pastor.
to what I just said earlier about there being a scriptural basis for all of these things. Like that's what we're talking about here is if you reverse engineer the language that comes out of your mouth. Well, the scripture tells us that it's from our heart that the words come out of our mouth. And so the things that are coming out that are shaping the culture around us are indicative of what's going on inside of us. So an unhealthy person, an unhealthy leader is going to use language to shape an unhealthy organization. Inversely, someone who is healthy and whole on the inside, that will come out of them, whether they are intentional about it or not, because it's what comes out is a reflection of what's on the inside. And then therefore, hopefully you will have a culture and a community that's formed by this inner glory that's coming out through the language we use.
Okay, talk to us about number 5.
Number 5, we're moving on to active participants over passive spectators.
So this is the trajectory of healthy churches. I think the caveat being sometimes there can be short-term success that is kind of underscored by unhealthy rhythms.
Okay.
Because I have seen and been part of churches that have been very well attended and very passionate, but the way it was achieved was like through creating this spectacle that everyone wanted to kind of like come and see.
Sure.
Did that necessarily translate to people being more formed like Jesus? That's the part that I was a bit more skeptical of. And so this is a really easy axiom to apply to all of the specific programming and ministries that you have in your church. How is this creating active participants? Are we at risk of this contributing to people being more passive spectators? And I think for a little while, I thought that even Sunday morning had troubles with this. And certainly there are versions of Sunday morning. I'm not against all programming and the importance of like sitting in pews and hearing teaching and participating in corporate worship. But how can we move people beyond just coming to church, sitting down, and departing again? How can we move them into service, into action, into being the hands and feet of Jesus and not just observing the programming that your church has so thoughtfully put on?
Yeah, and I think in the West, we're really up against this here, because I know, I'm confident a lot of the folks listening to this show feel the same way that a lot of the folks that I talk to, both in my personal life and in my work here, are feeling, which is, okay, like this one doesn't surprise me, Braid. This one doesn't surprise me, Alex. I know I look at my church and I want them to be more active participants. I just don't know how to accomplish that, because we live in a world that is spectacular by nature. We want to sit down and be entertained. We want to have someone do the work for us. And so in the West, I do feel like we're really up against it in this respect. Culturally, the way that we have been practicing our Sunday worship over the last 50 years has set us up for being in a really tough spot right now with this one in particular, from transitioning folks out of just spectating and observing and receiving and feeling on Sunday morning to actually belonging and becoming the church. This one's a bit more of a narrow road ahead of us, but I think it's essential. I think we're all kind of feeling this is essential for a marker of a real healthy church community.
Let's also emphasize there's a difference between being committed to a habit and seeing the fruit from that. What we're talking about here is process.
Right.
We're not talking about harvest.
Yeah.
So, you can be committed to active participants and not passive spectators, and then look at the landscape of your church and be like, I don't know if we're fulfilling this just yet. That's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
The commitment to the habit is what's important. Commitment to hard work, commitment to holy character, commitment to, using language that intentionally builds culture. The specifics of that, of course, are going to be unique to each individual church. The success and or translation of these habits into material efforts, sometimes that can be years.
Yeah.
Maybe for other churches, it's months. The outcome is not always in your control. The input is.
That's right.
And we're here to focus on inputs. Let's move to the sixth.
Over the hump now. Number 6, calculated delusion.
Hey, you knew it was going to be on here. I thought that was just for you, Braden. No, it's for all. And I think the pastor at my church, I think is the really best example of this, Pastor Justin. He will just never take no for an answer, in the sense that would be like, well, our budget's too small. He's like, wow, watch me. Oh, well, you know what? We've done a lot already as a church. I don't think that we could also do this. And he's like, okay, I understand. I'm going to give it a try anyway. Calculated delusion is basically just asking yourself the question, well, why not us? Why can't we be the church that does this? Or said differently, if not us, then who?
Right.
And that is how it would apply to making a difference in your community. I think if you were crazy enough to go into ministry, there's a certain part of you that I am certain of claimed this. And maybe it's been lost over the years of being in ministry as you just kind of get beaten down by how challenging it is. But this idea of possibility, and sometimes other people would say that's delusional. And how many, Bible characters were
it's the whole story.
Thought of in the same way. How many? Okay, all of them. Pastor he endorses all the characters. Maybe then what we should be talking about is not simply believing this, but protecting this mentality and understanding that the grind of ministry year after year, and this is why we see so many people hey, I was around for 3 years, 5 years, but not many people stay with it for so long, protecting this belief because it's key to being a healthy leader and building a healthy church, understanding that virtually everything else that's happening is trying to strip it away from you.
Yeah, in my view, that's exactly it. That's the key to it all, is protecting this spirit of imagination. It's basically what it is a prophetic imagination, which is I can't quite see it, but I believe that we can do it by the grace of God. It's that's literally the story, is that this thing that we believe, that a man was dead and then rose again from the grave and then ascended on a cloud, and then we're all going to do the same thing. That's delusional. That story's delusional. And so at the core, if we call ourselves Christians, the whole foundation of what we believe is delusional, not even calculated. That's just plain flat out delusional. And so to protect that spirit of wonder, that prophetic imagination, that's what keeps our vision open as a community. Because you're right, in the day-to-day, week-to-week, Sunday-to-Sunday grind, you kind of put your head down and just do the work. And it's you raise your head a few years later, it's well, what did we do over the last few years? Because we were just pulling off those Sunday services. We were just doing what we could. But to keep that dream, that vision alive, that's what keeps our communities moving forward, evolving with each other, and evolving with God over time.
Well, speaking of prophetic imagination, I was texting my co-host Alex a couple of days ago, and I was saying, man, you won't believe this, but I had a dream. I was writing podcast episodes because I couldn't come up with any new ideas. And he said, we call that anxiety. And then I told him that later that day, I had written while I was on the massage table, just chilling in silence, I had written multiple podcast episodes. And I said, so that was not anxiety. I don't claim that, Pastor. Can you believe that he put that on me? I said, that was prophetic imagination.
Yeah,
So,
I did.
I'm trying to protect it. He's trying to take it.
Yes, I tested your word and I was wrong.
Oh, you tested me. See, that's the language pastors love to use. You get them into a corner and they're like, wow, I was just testing
Yeah.
it.
Speaking of language, number 7.
All right.
Devotion over dogma.
Alliteration, you love to see it.
We do love to see it.
So let's be clear. Dogma is almost always used as a term in relation to religiosity. And there are certain dogmas that I think are cool. Like, hey, Jesus rose from the dead. I'm not here to question it. Let's go with
We
it.
need that one. Yeah.
What invariably happens in unhealthy churches is that dogma does not stay restricted to like the core tenets of the faith, like the Apostles' Creed or whatever it might be. It starts to extend to like, this is how we do things in this church. It starts to extend in unhealthy ways to like, we have to protect leadership. And it's not about devotion to the mission of the church. It's now about devotion to this dogmatic structure that is unassailable and cannot be questioned. And this gets back to like short-term success. The reality is we all have a craving for certainty. And so in ministry, you can create a dogmatic structure where the boundaries and the expectations and the rules, frankly, are so black and white that it's actually attractive because it makes sense of the chaos of everyday life. And in the short term, that can be a great way to rally a bunch of people to your cause, especially if you can position it where there's actually an enemy that they're familiar with. In the long term, only rotten fruit will come from that. Or no, let's say not only, God is very powerful.
Yes.
Many rotten fruits will come from that alongside, let's hope, God willing, beautiful fruit. And so the healthy churches resist that. And you know what? Sometimes in that resistance, you see other churches like in the short term seem to like outpace you.
Totally.
And that can be really challenging because you're like, I feel like we're committed to the right things and we're not like doing these things that I don't feel comfortable with. But like, if I'm honest, I think if we did those things, maybe more people would come. Maybe more people would give. Yeah. Maybe more people would like respond and get involved because like we'd build this culture where it's kind of like, yeah, this is how it goes. And if you're going to be a part of it, you're going to do this.
How do you, my question about this is, if you belong to a church structure that is dogmatic about things that ought not to be dogmatic, how do you even begin to identify that in the first place if you're caught up in it?
As a leader or as an attender?
I mean, both maybe.
I would say
probably as a leader because you're the one shaping the culture. You're the one setting the boundaries. Or maybe you're the one who grew up in the culture and has always existed within the boundaries. Maybe if you grew up in that church or you just belonged to that church for a long time, now you're leading in the church. How do you get the perspective you need to see the things that you have installed as dogma that ought not to be?
What happens is you start with a mission or you start with a very poorly articulated mission. And then what happens is method takes the place of mission. And so getting back to the language you use becomes the culture you build. Typically, when I'm having conversations with a church and they're open to hearing what I have to say.
Sure.
Like, let's talk about the limitations of you serving in church. Maybe like you're not the person with the voice that anyone is going to listen to. So like, I'm not here to say that just say this and it'll fix it. But the mission should be what we are aspiring to. Method should not take the place of mission. And so usually as we begin to evaluate or take inventory of what's happening, the goal is to identify, is this mission or is this method? If method is in the place of mission, that's idolatry.
Right.
So for example, if the method is like a certain structure of service and like we will never like disembark from that, that could be a sign that like, well, that sounds like dogma, not just devotion to something, but like we cannot question this. When things cannot be questioned, that's a good sign that it's dogma and not devotion. Because if something is put in a place where it can't be questioned, to me, that seems like it's weak and vulnerable and must be protected. Like, no. If you are devoted to something, like ask as many questions as you want. Like, I'm devoted to this and perhaps you can poke holes in something, but like, I'm not afraid of that. I don't need to like protect this out of fear. And then the other thing is evaluating all decisions based on mission. Once we've like articulated, this is what mission is, this is what method is, and we're no longer making decisions based on method. The second step would say, okay, in light of what we understand the mission to be, is this ministry? Is this language? Is this tone? Is this how we, behave? Is this these behavioral trends accountable to this or not? The reason you have to figure out if it's mission or method from the beginning is if you start with that second step, you'd be like, well, are these behavioral patterns like accountable to the mission? You'd be like, yes, because our mission is this. Well, that's method, that's not mission.
Yeah.
And I know I'm just like putting a lot of words out there. This stuff like isn't especially easy. And we'll get to this in one of the later healthy habits. But when you drift from mission, that's when things become problematic. It's that slow drift that happens over time where you become so familiar with what you do as a church that you've lost focus on like the ultimate outcome and the ultimate aspiration and objective. And it all becomes around like method because it's method is comfortable.
Totally.
Especially if you're a church of like, let's say not a mega church that usually has to have a lot of systems in place or an extremely, extremely charismatic leader that can also get yourself into trouble in these same ways. You're 100 people as a church. You like things a certain way. You've now created this rigid structure that keeps you comfortable, but that's not the purpose of the church. That's when method takes the place of it.
Yeah. Well, let's get into it then with the next two. We are in the home stretch here. Let's go for number 8, vocal about values.
Okay, so sometimes we've talked about mission as being this thing that is not especially spreadable as an idea. It's something you talk about as leadership. If you're the senior leader, you know it off by heart. But it's not easy to share from stage.
Sure.
Because, it's virtually the same for every single church, and you might have a pithy way of saying it. And then there are values. Values are the ways that your church uniquely lives out the mission.
Yeah.
Churches that build healthy culture never shut up about these values.
That's true.
They are vocal about these values from stage. They are vocal about them within leadership. They are vocal about them with volunteers and in every single ministry team. Because what they do is they hold everyone accountable to the ideas that the church claims it's committed to.
Yeah.
That is so powerful. It is such a powerful habit. It's like saying to your husband, to your wife, like, I am committed to like dying to self to love you. If you keep emphasizing that over and over again as a value and you say it out loud, every single behavior that does not align with that value comes into question.
That's right.
If you're silent about these values, in the same way that we can get obsessed with mission, with method instead of mission, you can get kind of stuck in these like behavioral conversations or like these programming conversations. And now it's your preference versus my preference. It's what I like versus what you like. And in no ways are we like coming together to make sure that we're accountable to these values. The key is being vocal about values. You can never overstate them too much. By the time that you are so sick of them, is probably the time that like the people that attend church like every other week are like, oh yeah, I think I've heard that before.
Yeah, I love when I get to perceive church communities where it's not just the senior leadership or the worship leader or the person doing the announcements who knows the values, but when just the attendee, the lay person, the people who just belong to the church and make up the church, when they catch these values and they start using them in their own language, you see it sometimes on social, you'll see it, you know it when you bump into these people. It's like, oh, you're being like very intentionally formed in your faith community, and it is determining how you make decisions on the 167 hours beyond your Sunday service. And I can see that all over you because of how well internalized your values are in your church community. It's pretty cool stuff.
And this is the healthy way of building culture, distinct from the dogmatic way. Because the reality is, even a church that's average size, 85 people, let's say, that's a lot of people. You as a senior leader cannot like enforce a certain way of behavior amongst all those people. All you can do is cast vision, and you do that by being vocal about values. And ideally, you as the senior leader can affect, 6 to 12 people that are like in volunteer or in leadership in your church. And then ideally, they can affect 6 to 12 people. And that is how you replicate the vision for the church, by being vocal about values. And yeah, what is more rewarding than hearing someone that's been attending for like 6 months and then they say verbatim one of the values, and they talk about how that is informing the decisions they make and the behavior that they commit to and the evaluation that they then put on themselves when they say, am I living up to the standards that I claim I want to? Only way to get there is not just about codifying the values, But then again, never shutting up about them.
Exactly. So on the heels of that, number 9, healthy churches are accountable to the mission.
Yeah, I got into this a little bit earlier. Basically, this is the antidote for the senior leader that can never be questioned, which I think we've all seen or been a part of a church where it's like that. Where like we're accountable to almost always his vision. No, we're accountable to the mission of the church. And if the senior leader is making decisions or slipping into habits of behavior that are antithetical to the mission, then that means they are out of line because the head of this church is Jesus.
That's right.
Not this person. They are the shepherd for this flock of people, and they have a role of authority, but the mission is what is always there. And the churches that are the healthiest, they have this habit of, in their yearly reviews, in their ministries, in their volunteer teams, saying, like, hey, we're doing this thing. Why are we doing this? Well, we're doing it for this reason. And you anchor back to mission, and you anchor back to mission. So there's accountability, and there's also anchoring to remind everyone why we're doing it. And the more that you reinforce and reemphasize that, the more people are able to act in the way that you want, because they can truly see this isn't just about like one dude's ideas.
That's right.
This is about a church that is living out the words of Scripture and the wisdom of Scripture in practical ways. And all of us followers of Jesus are like, yeah, that is what I want. And I can trust that the holy character resides in these leaders because you can see that they're holding themselves accountable just as much as they expect me to be held accountable. And truthfully, they're almost certainly holding themselves to a higher degree of account because of how much more they're involved by nature of their vocation.
Well, and that's it, right? Like to be a healthy community requires accountability to something. And so you have to discern what that thing is. And for our Christian communities, well, we have a mission. And like we've said on this episode, and we say so many times, all of our churches say it differently, but the mission is the mission that was handed to the disciples by Jesus, and we're just following along. And so we're accountable to each other, but yes, accountable to that mission, which came from what we believe to be God himself, is to go out and make disciples in the love and the grace and peace of Jesus Christ. And so keeping ourselves accountable to that ends up keeping our communities accountable and avoids a lot of the pitfalls of unhealthy communities, unhealthy leaders, unhealthy people. It kind of all hinges on accountability. Let's bring it home. Number 10, healthy churches do this thing. They emphasize young people.
Yeah, Alex said that every one of these stanzas, axioms, values, healthy habits is undergirded by a scripture. Well, not this one. I don't know if there is a scriptural
I don't know,
verse.
I'm seeing an image of Jesus welcoming little children, and they're saying,
And then saying, and actually, this will help you grow your church. So this one is based on research data. And if you go into the podcast archives, you can find an episode that we did with Dr. Kara Powell, one of the authors of the book Growing Young, that was published by the Fuller Youth Institute. We're just going to quote kind of the general thesis of this book. Based on research, we're actually calling for churches to dedicate a disproportionately large amount of attention and investment in teenagers and young adults. Why? Because churches that make young people feel at home experience growth across all generations. In other words, young people multiply what is invested in them into the rest of their congregation. You can interrogate the data to basically counteract this claim. But if you believe that the data was properly accumulated, what this suggests is that the healthiest churches have this disproportionate focus on young people. Why? Because every other generation benefits from this. I have seen this in the church that I grew up in. So I've seen it firsthand. One person's anecdotal evidence doesn't mean that it's right. This published research is not unassailable. No, research is. But I am very much convinced that if we're looking for practical applications, of which these healthy habits, albeit have not included too much practical application, this is one of the few that I think every church can lean into, and healthy outcomes will come from it.
I think what I would say is the spiritual element to that is the same thing that we've talked about earlier, which is to look at young people and see them as worth investing in disproportionately like giving more resources, investing more resources into the young people than other areas of your church, I think that actually is an act of prophetic imagination. I think it's looking at something that is not yet. You're looking at kids who are still kids. They're acting a fool. They're teenagers doing ridiculous things. They're disappointing you because they're not as mature as you want them to be. Their hair is ridiculous. What are they wearing? What are they saying? What are the songs they want us to sing? You're looking at that kind of a mess, and you see the future of the church. And that takes prophetic imagination to do, because on the surface, it's like, no, these kids are out of control. But to disproportionately invest in them is an act of like a faith, of like seeing that we only get older. And so these kids are going to be the future of this community if they stick around. And so how can we pave the way? How can we extend the runway for them to stick around and get married in this church and have kids in this church and raise families in this church, so that this community here at the corner of whatever intersection your church finds itself on can continue to grow and continue to thrive? I've been really like encouraged and inspired by Dr. Kara Powell's work. She's got a new book that she actually just sent us 2 copies of, called Future Focused Church.
And that's the reason we did this episode. It was all an ad. You've been fooled.
I haven't read it yet, but I'm eager to read it. It just came in the mail. It surprised us here at the office. Came in the mail the other day. So yeah, of course, our affiliate links for the sales of those books are in the description. But since being exposed to her work and the Fuller Youth Institute and paying attention to the data that they're presenting, our church has changed some of our habits. We've changed what we've said yes to, what we've said no to. We've changed where we are investing resources, both time and money. And it's been youth centric, youth focused. And so, like you said, that's an investment that you don't get to harvest right away. But it's sowing good seeds. And I also believe, I'm with you, I believe that the data proves it as well.
To be clear, no affiliate links, no ads. We do not and never have engaged in any of those things. If you do, that's cool. We just don't hear. If you're thinking about this in terms of pure years, if the average person lives to 80, let's say, and you're as a church choosing to invest, okay, if we can invest evenly, let's say, or we can invest disproportionately. If you invest in the 40-year-olds, the 60-year-olds, for your church and for the global church, they might have 40 years left, 20 years left. Mm-hmm. You invest those same resources or disproportionate resources in the 20-year-olds, they got 60 years left. Mm-hmm. And so I do think there's something to that.
Yes.
The other part is, I remember my mom saying to me when I started this company at 21, she said, like, you are working with extreme vigor right now. She's like, keep it up as long as you can. Because one day, you just won't want to show up in the same way. I have 2 kids. I'm 34 now. I'm not quite there yet, but like, I don't have the same vitality as I did in my 20s. Mm-hmm. And so like, it makes a lot of sense to invest in people when they have the most energy and like effort to give. Like there's a reason why professional athletes and Olympians are in their 20s.
Yeah.
And like you see an athlete like LeBron James or Tom Brady, you're like, why and how are you doing this as a 40-something-year-old? That is insane. Mm-hmm. The same is true for the energy that young people bring to their faith. Yeah. And to sharing the gospel. And you just see like people get older and it's a fight against losing your prophetic imagination. It's a fight against like becoming bitter. Mm-hmm. It's a fight to protect this calculated delusion. There's no like protecting calculated delusion. You're just delusional in the best way. And so like investing in that generation absolutely makes sense, that it would pay spiritual dividends, not just for them, not just for the global church, not just for your church, but every single generation in your church as well. 10 healthy habits. Did we miss one? Something you'd like to add? Throw it into the comments. We'll see you next week. Thanks always for your time, attention, and trust.
Some good wrestling this weekend, though. Like this past weekend.
Yeah, you still keeping up with it?
Yeah. I'll watch the recaps.
Nice. Yeah. All right. Hey, look.
And recap on what Mitch has yelled into the void on when I wake up on Tuesday morning or whatever. Poor guy.
It's tough.